Everyone, and welcome to DNA Behavior's presentation on navigating your financial behavior. This week we're covering understanding and managing client couples, which comes down to our comparison reporting options within our platform. So with me today we have Leanne Morales, our Chief Relationship Officer, who will be hosting our presentation. I'm Trip Rockwell, your Chief Marketing Officer here. And just a few household items to clarify for everyone. We will be keeping everybody in mute so that there's not a lot of cross chatter as we present, but we certainly welcome questions and comments along the way. So if you use the chat or the question box, we will certainly be mindful of that and get back to you as soon as we can. Today's webinar is set for, we've given ourselves 45 minutes, but we're going to try and keep that closer to a half an hour. That way it gives you some of your time back as we work through the materials here. Also know that we are recording this webinar so that you will get a link once it's completed so that you can review it at your leisure at another time, and then that the presentation itself will also be emailed to you so you have a copy of the deck that we're using and some of the appendix materials that aren't covered. You'll have access to that as well. Also, for attending or for registering, we give you a copy of the DNA Behavior Unlocking Financial Personalities Guide. So for those of you that opt in to take your profile, and everyone is welcome to, in fact, we strongly encourage it as part of the experience, but you get your profile, share it with your teammates, allow them to take their profile. That unlocking guide becomes key to deciphering some of the insights for your teams, for your clients, and the way that the program is intended. Also of note, we'll have some poll questions along the way, just to make sure everyone's keeping up and on board on the same page. So look for those as we continue on, and that there is a survey at the end, and we strongly recommend you guys participate in that as well. We take that information, that feedback to heart in our future programming and the topics that we discuss. So without further ado, I think we're ready to get going.
All right.
Thanks,
Trip, and welcome everyone to the call. This is we do every other month. We do an 11 o'clock series that covers people on the West Coast, or actually more on Europe, and then we actually have a 1 o'clock series that'll be happening next month. The focus today is going to be on couples using financial DNA. And it's one of probably my favorite topics to talk about because it's quite interesting to sort of see two spouses sort of compared together, and then the role of the advisor actually building a suitable portfolio. So the objectives today are going to be around defining financial behavior. We'll sort of dig into that. Talk about the 10 unique styles, 5 of them being more relational, 5 of them being more results focused. And then we'll actually look at a case study of couples. We'll look at a couple of reports and then look at market mood and the performance on that. And then basically implementing a behavioral approach. So with those subjects, as Trip mentioned, we'll try to keep it under around 30 to 35 minutes. There's always questions that do come up. Please enter those into the chat box, and Trip is great at managing those. And if something's real relevant to the group, we'll bring those up at the end. So you probably have had this experience. It's one of our favorite cartoons to insert in a presentation, but sort of you giving all this information, this great information to the couple, and basically what was understood is virtually nothing. And that really speaks to how people perceive things, how they hear things, and what they need to be able to actually understand what the advisor is actually saying. And that's what we really believe with using financial DNA as a solution can help you understand, have better meetings, and actually reduce the misunderstandings that happen that can lead to compliance risks for the firm and for you as a practitioner. Using behavioral intelligence, it's one thing that we do advocate, not only just for the advisor going through this process, learning about themselves, but also your clients, being a husband and wife, that in a relationship that you have with a couple, many times if there's a change in the relationship, if there's possibly a death in the family or a family status change or a job loss, that the other spouse might leave that firm and it happens quite frequently, and it's usually a result of the advisor only was focused on one of the partners, probably who he or she was more behaviorally sort of like, and that the other person really never felt part of the relationship or the meetings. And what you're really trying to do is really engage with both partners, because you want to build a suitable portfolio that's going to be for their family, and then you can lead much more successful meetings with using the insights to, with the couple to be able to understand, what their needs would be. And then the third bullet there really speaks to creating that customized experience for them of building the suitable portfolio. So it's important when you think about recruiting prospects, if you have a possibility of losing, half of your client base because there's a family status change, when you could have done some very subtle things to actually keep both of them engaged, it seems like the right proposition. We do have a poll question just to start us off here.
All right, everybody. So who currently among us is using a behavioral finance tool? So we'll get a quick cross-section of folks and see where we lie. That seems to be pretty good. Share those results real quick, and off and on right around 75%. That's typical. Some folks have an off-cuff way of getting a feel for the room or a feel for the person in front of them, and maybe that works. But we've tried to hone in on a definite program here. So.
All right. And for the 75%, that's great that you're using sort of a tool. The ones that are saying no, it's one thing that you might want to evaluate as you're going through the process. We do know that firms that use sort of a solution, and certainly, we're pretty sold on what we do, that you have a much higher sort of engagement with your clients. So if you're not using something, you really should consider using a tool to be able to actually understand and sort of use it with your client engagements. So one of the things that we have is a tool called Market Mood in our system, and we're going to talk a little about it a little bit later. But think about in a volatile market where one of the spouses is going to react very maybe confidently that maybe it's a buying opportunity. The other one's going to have an emotional tug, very nervous. Within the same couple, you may have these sort of emotions that you as an advisor would need to manage. That's what you're really trying to understand at this much deeper level that we call financial DNA. These insights really help understand how to be able to manage those conversations with those people. And our starting point is really what we call natural behavior. It is a questionnaire. It's 46 questions that I've highlighted here. It takes about 10 to 12 minutes. It measures this thing called natural and instinctive behavior, indicated by the water line underneath the iceberg, is really around that natural instinctive wiring. And if any of you are familiar with Daniel Kahneman's work on thinking fast and slow, he won the Nobel Prize. He really talked about those levels, those level 1 and level 2, or system 1, system 2 behaviors. They're so innate in us, we don't even know why we do certain things. So think that out with a client. They may operate, using what we call level 2 behaviors, which are much more sort of about our experiences and our jobs, our relationships, education. That can be pretty high level sort of emotional intelligence around their thinking. But in times of stress or volatile markets, they may revert back to that level 1 behavior. And that's really what you're trying to understand with financial DNA through this discovery process. What are those innate behaviors with the client? So you can build a portfolio that's really suitable for them. Because there are other things that can measure level 2 behaviors, even interviewing the client. But a lot of times the client wouldn't be able to self-disclose what their level 1 behavior is because they're not in that pressure situation. So it's just important to know that starting line. And that's really what level 1 behavior is and what we measure in that financial DNA discovery process. So when you're actually guiding a client through sort of the decision making, we call our methodology called Know, Engage, and Grow. Know is actually going through sort of the discovery process. Your client goes through that process independently of you in your office, potentially, maybe in your office. But it's sort of an exercise they go through. They get the results immediately after they complete it around these things called behavioral biases, their risk potential or their risk score, if you provide that information to them, and then their communication keys. And many times we encourage them to share it with their spouse even before coming to your office. So that is really around the know engage. So you're actually creating sort of discussions around the client couple. And then the grow, the know, engage, and grow really is optimizing sort of behaviors and building a suitable portfolio for the client. Potentially, if you do family work with the couple, with their children, or their and their families, you can really understand how to actually use the tools to be able to use that know, engage, and grow methodology. And I mentioned the 10 profiles when we started, and after somebody completes these things, these 46 questions, what we call financial DNA, they'll score with this profile type. And the folks over here on the right of the 5 are much more relational. They tend to be, depending on up here at the top, a little bit more fast-paced. Down here would be a little bit more carefully moved. And then the folks over here on the left would be what we'd call more results-focused profiles. There's really no right or wrong answer for anybody in this, but it really is how they process information or how they think about it. But if Tripp and I are both what we call initiators, and we tend to be represented by just high level. We tend to speak pretty fast, think pretty fast through things. The downside is sometimes we think pretty fast, but we may not think about through all the details just because we're moving at a fast pace. When we're working with somebody that's on the facilitator side, and we do actually in our company work with someone like that, they actually are a little more thoughtful, may need a little bit more information, explanations. So we actually may have a very different communication method. But if we understand that, we can actually go into the discussion or the meeting understanding what the needs are. And that's what you're doing with your client couples. You're understanding what the differences are between the two of them, and then focusing on things that are going to actually be for a mutual decision. Because it's very difficult for that initiator or that facilitator to speak up in the moment. So it really helps the advisor some keys to be able to work with both clients. Pretty easy to use. And as Tripp mentioned, the unlocking guide, which is actually one of the handouts listed in the handouts, if you download that, you actually take this discovery process, or somebody from your team takes that, you'll start seeing some of those patterns in the communication, the keys. It can be really quite an amazing process just to do this. And we're offering this sort of as a complimentary exercise for you to go through. And then to build on that unlocking guide, we have what we call a compatibility matrix, and it's really around how much sort of modification you're going to need in your communication sort of presentation, or how you communicate with someone. So I mentioned the initiator, which Tripp and I are both initiators working with that facilitator, and you can see that would be right here. Someone that would need a lot more, would probably need the most modification, and we do see that. If you're actually working with another initiator, that's pretty easy. You sort of move through things pretty quickly. Just giving you sort of an idea how you use this compatibility matrix. We've got a lot of documentation and training on how actually that works. And then just to give you an idea of what we call the forced choice methodology, sort of for natural behavior. This is sort of a view of the questions. You have to choose a most and a least in each one of these examples. And that really will, and it takes about 10 to 12 minutes to complete 46 questions. What it'll do after completing that process, we immediately give the advisor or the client some information about their own sort of discovery process. And it's important, we advocate always to give a report or sort of a video of the experience for that individual to learn about how they actually are naturally wired. It's really important for them to do that, because it's that self-discovery. They may ask you a couple of questions about it. Some really, some excellent sort of results usually come out of that learning process for that client. And at the end of the process of taking those 46 questions, it really does give that client these 5 what we call radio dials around sort of the investment sort of approach to investing. How much of a risk taker are they? Do they want to actually take control of the meeting with the client, or are they actually more comfortable to relinquish sort of the guidance from the advisor? Do they like to save and follow a budget? Do they pursue goals pretty ambitiously, or are they sort of tempering that? And then, will they have sort of an emotional reaction, in times of volatility? So it gives you some great information to be able to actually understand how that client is wired, and it gives them, more importantly, gives them that sort of information to learn about themselves and how they actually approach investing. And recently, starting, I believe we launched this in early December, we call this the Financial Behavior Report. And it's, again, building on those 5 radio buttons that we mentioned. Great information that the client would receive this report, the advisor would. There's more in-depth reporting that the advisor would have, but this particular one-page report gives you a lot of great information, gives the 2 top behavioral biases of the client, shows the financial behavior, gives some great information about how that client really likes to work from an advisory capacity, the client's comfort zone, and those elements of risk. Some great things that you can glean from this report. Again, we would always advocate the client receives it as part of the end user report. And when we're actually educating the advisors on using the information we call natural behavior or financial DNA, it does measure that hardwired behavior that I mentioned, that level 1 behavior. We are not, and certainly don't advocate that we identify mental health issues. That's really left to professionals that are skilled in that. This is really more about communication, learning preferences, and building a suitable portfolio. The behavioral traits do remain stable over time. So our guidance is once somebody completes it, you only have to take it once. It does remain stable over time. So you don't have to take it whether you're 18 or 90. There's no good or bad styles. I did mention that. It's just how we're wired. And then we always advocate never use it to box people, because there's a tendency if somebody's a little bit more fast-paced, you can learn from these things, but you really don't want to just label people that, that they're a certain way, because we all do have that lever of learned behavior that we can exercise. And there's a very low chance that 2 people would ever have the exact style. And we actually, even deeper, as you get deeper into the profile, there's no 2 profiles that'll ever be exactly the same. It's quite amazing. And then our input is always never use it to make decisions solely on a report. This is just an input or a data point. And that great advisors do come from every behavioral style. I've seen it. I've talked with every member of an advisory team from every one of the 10 profiles. It's just how they actually use that information to be able to guide their clients. And then there's really no behavioral differences between gender, age, and birth order. We do have another poll question.
All right, everybody. So at this point, do you understand how behavioral biases impact investor and advisor decision making? And we'll let that simmer a little bit. Get about 50% of the poll, maybe. There we go. And share those results. Pretty much keeping everybody in line here, Leon. I appreciate that, as always. But certainly some of those questions may linger. Behavioral biases, obviously, how they affect decision making as a whole. We focus on the financial side. And then how it affects both sides of the table, whether it's the advisor or the investor. It's just being mindful to mitigate those negative attributes along the way. We can get into that deeper on a separate conversation for sure.
Yeah, no, that's great, and certainly the what we've covered so far hasn't gotten too deep into the behavioral biases, but one that I focus on quite a bit is the loss aversion pattern. Where someone is more sort of risk tolerant, but their ability to actually accept a loss, is factored in there. But that is an example of the behavioral bias, but it does impact it. A lot of times, your client would never even know they have a loss aversion pattern.
Exactly. Of the 16 that we track and trace, we define those, we measure those. There's an element of that to everybody's profile. We just track the top 2. They remain stable over time as well. That would be the only kind of negative impact, I guess you could say, as to building a profile and having those financial conversations. And we cover those deeper on our website and other materials along the way.
Yeah, no, that's great. So this is obviously just a precursor for everyone, but there's much deeper insights, that you can gain from your clients on these behavioral biases. So now we did show you the financial behavior report, which showed the individual. And again, with that launch we did in December for the financial behavior report, we have this fantastic comparison report that shows both of your couples sort of stack ranked together. So you see this in this example with Chris Coddington and Helen Jones, and these are actual people. You're going to see Chris is what we call a strategist. So on that circle graph that I showed earlier, he's going to be more of that results-focused individual. And you've got Helen, who's an engager, but they're sort of somewhat at the top, a little bit more in that fast-paced sort of thinking on how they would make decisions. But you can see here, when it comes to being a risk taker, that Chris is definitely higher than Helen. And you do see when it's controlling or having the advisor actually provide guidance. Chris is very low. He actually likes to make those decisions on his own. And Helen's at 50, so it's not like they're both sort of really seeking out the advisor to give guidance from. So in the work that you do, you really have to just provide options, some very interesting things, and there's verbiage in there on how to actually work with a couple with, the scoring pattern like this. On saving, Chris is pretty high at 68, Helen at 58. That would show or suggest that both of them are fairly comfortable to follow budgets. You don't have to chase them around or, find out their spending patterns not under control. They both are fairly high in pursuing goals at 89 and 63, and they are also pretty sophisticated in their financial emotional intelligence, very closely aligned. They definitely recognize sort of those emotional impulses and probably act very rationally. So this is actually, if you're working with this client and they're closely aligned, I'd say the biggest thing that you'd look at is here in this, how they actually would work with you as the advisor. But can really be very enlightening just to use this one-page comparison report. You'd see in their behavioral biases, in their individual financial behavior report, their behavioral biases and see where that biggest difference is between the two of them. And then this is just another view of a couple's talent report, we call it. And it'll show here where that difference that I mentioned between Chris, this is a different couple. This is Frank and Mary Butler, where Frank, I believe, is an initiator, and I believe that Mary is a relationship builder. But you can see here that there is definitely more of a need for Mary to delegate to the advisor, where Frank is going to be a little bit more about taking control of the meeting. So it's a different view of the information. So, but those tools are available, and it gives you a different view and understanding of how to work with the client. But you're going to definitely see Frank as the initiator. I'm sorry, Mary is the community builder. I thought it was a relationship builder. But she's very low risk in her investing, that natural behavior at 16, and you see him with that very high 92% risk. So you can imagine when you're building a suitable portfolio for both of them, that you need to really factor in both of their sort of information, because if something did happen, you'd want to make sure that Mary is sort of bought into the plan. And highly suggest that you use an IPS sign off when you have such a big difference between a couple like this. And then when you're working with the client, sort of even this is a really proactive sort of solution here we call market mood. And this is a view of what it would look like if you log into your system. You'd see the market mood of every client. It's tied to the S&P 500. It gives a 15-day trailing average sort of script that you can use. And there's other information that you can drill down into. But on any given day, in this particular day, if you logged in, you'd see that 17% of your clients are going to be apprehensive. And that would suggest that if the market's going up, and it is, here it's showing the S&P for the trailing 15 days is up 2.18%. Most people would actually you would think would be excited about it, but there's always going to be a group of people that are more cautious and a little bit concerned when the market goes up too rapidly, because they would on the other side of it see that it will be going down. But it gives you some great information to be able to work with the client, our suggestion isn't to call the client when you see their market mood as being apprehensive, but just to know when you're actually talking what some of their concerns would be. And there's some very proactive scripting that you can use with that client. And it's all part of the retail packages, but market mood is an enabler. It really helps financial advisors when they don't really sort of, they're more rational. They're not necessarily going to want to have an emotional call with an individual. These scripts can be really important to be able to know what types of conversations to have with each person. Another poll question?
All right, everyone. So can you now, as an advisor, use behavioral finance to understand client personalities and help them achieve their goals? Pretty straightforward. Just keeps everybody on point. And I think we've done pretty well here. I think, Leanne, you're keeping everyone
all right,
pretty well together here.
Very nice. Great. All right. So
pretty easy. Yeah.
That actually is sort of our presentation material around the couples reporting, and I gave you a couple of examples of the financial behavior report, that comparison report, and then that talent report, which shows the two spouses brought together. And really important information when you're working with clients, because I would say that's probably one of the advantages you could have over sort of another competitor, is that you really are able to key in on that information. We also wanted to feature our next webinar, which is for many of you that are entrepreneurs, sort of have your own independent firm, we have a behaviorally smart entrepreneurship webinar coming up on the 27th of March at 11 o'clock, and the registration button is here. So if you do join us, I think you'll see some commonality around sort of the discussion, but this is really going to be focused on sort of the master key executive. So if you're the CEO, finding that person that's going to actually be complementary to you, sort of understanding it. So it's really more around identifying the right talent in your business. And it runs along the same path that this comparison report that we just covered. So it's just matching two people and seeing where they have differences, but it's much more of a workplace perspective.
And also certainly points out you work with other entrepreneurs or business leaders, and if you get in depth into what their day-to-day workload and concerns are, this is, this kind of pulls back the covers a little bit as to what they're dealing with, those conversations you may have with them.
Great. Excellent. So please register for that. You will get a copy of this PDF, so you can actually click on that. And then the last thing we have is our registration. If you want to take the actual discovery yourself, you're welcome to do that. Our blog and podcast is listed here with additional resources. And then there's a whole section beneath this around resources that Tripp has included here. So I think we've included a number of sort of resources that you can connect with. We'd encourage you to take the profile yourself. You will get an email shortly after this call with a link if you want to talk to any of us on the team. We're happy to actually provide that for you.
One more slide, I think. We've enjoyed that our packages have gotten a makeover, and we're happy to the rollout is out there, and how we present ourselves to take your profile, share it with the team. The team takes their profile. We're happy to have those reviews on an individual basis. All that is complimentary. The resources are complimentary. The profiles are complimentary. When you see the value and what it means to your team, to your firm, that's when we can start the discussion as to what package may be suitable to fit your need and be the right solution moving forward.
Perfect. Thank you, Tripp. No questions from my group?
Just general that yes, and you've covered it. That we record these and we provide a link to the recordings. We provide the slides, and there's more beyond this that is shareable for review, and that the white paper are on all of our research are also available. How we came up with the formula and the research that went into it, and then the first choice. All that is readily available upon request. So thank you very much.
Great. All right. Thank you. Hope to hear you on a future webinar. If you would be kind and take the survey, that does help us really understand how to make these webinars better. Thank you and have a great day.
Thanks, everyone.